All right, so suppression of illegally obtained interceptions. This is kind of a big deal. It provides for its own statutory exclusionary rule that applies to oral and wire communications that were illegally intercepted by government actors as well as by private persons. So, with this, it's talking about its own statutory exclusionary rule. So, they're saying that they're saying here that the previously established exclusionary rule by the Supreme Court is applies to a point, but they've kind of established its own means of excluding evidence. So if I illegally wiretap your phone, then the exclusionary rule would apply. But if you had that knowledge of how to do that, and then you went out and did it as a private citizen, not as a government agent, then the statutory exclusionary rule would apply as well. So this only applies to oral and wire communications, but not to illegally intercepted electronic communications. For that, there's still criminal and civil penalties. And of course, any aggrieved person, which basically means any person who has had their wiretapped illegally may move to suppress the evidence in any state or federal proceeding. So they kind of grant that there. So essentially, rather than the federal government waiting to have a bunch of this stuff decided in case law and piecemeal decided that way, the federal Congress got together and said, here, let's just give you a law that covers all of it right away, and then we don't have to worry about you guys piecemealing this thing together. So we also have exemptions from Title III because there's exemptions to everything. And it says that the kinds of electronic communications not covered are cases of willful and voluntary disclosure, certain cases of eavesdropping, consent surveillance, provider exception, which actually doesn't exist anymore. And I'll talk about that in a second. Computer trespasser exception, the public access exception, pen registers, trap and trace devices and tracking devices, and then, of course, email, voicemail, and video surveillance. Of course, willful and voluntary disclosure is, hey, look, you want my phone? You think I did that? Here's my phone. Take a dig. Take a look. Right. Certain cases of eavesdropping. I imagine this right here was probably going to be something that you would imagine to be along the lines of a private investigator obtaining information. Consent surveillance. So this is something that you would find a lot of times with confidential informants on drug buys or something like that, where we might LoJack their car to make sure where they're at or something. Or if somebody says, hey, let me prove myself innocent here. And so then we'll do that. The provider exception, actually, what that part is, once upon a time, the law allowed for law enforcement to go to like your cell phone provider and obtain archival cell tower information, or to dig up your text messages from them, because that cell service provider had in a contract with you that any information transferred over their lines becomes their property and they can do with it what they want. And so we didn't need warrants for that back in those days. But here, actually, just within the last year or two, I would say late 2017, early 2018, somewhere around there, the Supreme Court passed a law that said that while there is some information that the providers can give us without a warrant, you do have a reasonable expectation of privacy as far as the information that is transmitted over the cell phone providers' transmission lines, and therefore information that should be confidential must remain confidential absent consent or a search warrant. Computer trespasser exception, that would seem obvious. Public access exception, so your any information that, like if you go to Liberal Memorial Library and you use one of their computers, any information that you exchange over that is not protected because you don't have that right to privacy there. Pen registers, trap and trace devices, and tracking devices. That's going to be something kind of like, whenever you go to Walmart, you swipe your card and then you have to sign for it. That would be a pen register there. Trap and trace, again, kind of the same sort of stuff. And then email, voicemail, and video surveillance. So with the video surveillance there, we're talking about like, if I go into Walmart to get video of somebody using your credit card illegally, nobody has a reasonable expectation of privacy to that because it's common knowledge that Walmart is recording. Okay, so here's where things start to get a little hairy. The Foreign Intelligence Service Act of 1978, commonly referred to as FISA, this authorizes and regulates the electronic surveillance of foreign powers and their agents within the United States. Now, this does not regulate United States governmental intelligence operations outside the United States. It does permit us to conduct electronic surveillance and physical searches for national defense purposes. It also authorizes physical searches of premises, information, material, or property used exclusively by or under the open and exclusive control of a foreign power or powers. So basically what this is if for some reason the Central Intelligence Agency or the National Security Agency, the CIA or NSA, happens to be conducting counterintelligence operations on, say, the Iranian embassy here in the United States. They have say there's a fellow working out of the Iranian embassy that lives in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, or something right there near Washington. And they have their embassy there, but they're living outside of the embassy. And we believe that person is a counterintelligence operative. Then FISA is the court that the federal government would go to obtain electronic surveillance orders on that counterintelligence operative. So it doesn't limit our operation. It doesn't regulate our operations outside of the United States, but it does allow us to conduct surveillance on foreign operatives within the United States. So interestingly enough, FISA applications are reviewed by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the FISA court, and they may also be reviewed and approved by the president via the attorney general. And challenges to FISA applications are done in Frank's proceedings. So we had a discussion on that in the search warrant section that comes from Franks v. Delaware, where basically if you believe that the FISA warrant is invalid, then you have to prove it. So I guess that gets us taken care of there. So I will go ahead and stop this one and see you for chapter 6.